Hello everybody and welcome back to OMB Reviews. I am the critic who is a cynic. Hope you're doing well, and today we'll be doing a box office breakdown for this past weekend, this Memorial Day weekend. So it's still going on even into Monday, but we have some early numbers, and we're going to talk about The Little Mermaid, how it's doing okay domestically, but internationally, oh boy, this movie is in a ton of trouble, seeing that it has had a simultaneous release in all of the major markets overseas, with the one exception being Japan. However, if we are looking at the other markets in the East right now, it is not looking good at all for the prospects of this movie's international numbers, and the domestic really aren't that much better to be able to say it'll make up for any of its losses there. So what am I saying? I think there's a good chance that we'll see The Little Mermaid end up being a box office flop, and let's just say couldn't happen to a nicer company. We'll also give an update on the latest numbers for Fast 10, as that film is also not looking to be very good either, though it's having the reverse problem where that film is struggling tremendously to do anything in the domestic market, barely going over $100 million after 2 weeks, but is doing much better in the international market, and so we'll talk about that. Also some updates to Guardians of the Galaxy, Super Mario Brothers, and others. Before we go further, please make sure to smash that like button. Slap that fire button if you're watching over on Odyssey, and smash the rumble button as well. Also, make sure that you are subscribed to the channel with that bell notification on. That way you never know video or live stream goes live on the channel. So as you can see, over on Deadline, we've got The Little Mermaid splashes. Oh, I love their puns. To $164 million global. But, oh, and here the excuses begin. There's something fishy going on overseas as Disney is beset by review bombing. Yes, you see that correctly. In their headline on Deadline, they are saying review bombing is the reason why this film is not doing anything overseas. Essentially, this is their excuse. This is what they've tried to come up with, because they went into the weekend saying, okay, here's what we think is going to happen. And in this case, it didn't happen, right? In this case, it did not actually come to fruition. And so instead of blaming the movie, instead of saying that it's because the movie isn't really all that good, or that the movie has problems, or that, hey, there are a lot of people that do not want to see this movie or do not like this movie because of a wide vast of reasons. Instead, they're saying, oh, the reason is that people are review bombing it, and so therefore people are going onto websites, looking at those reviews and saying, well, now I'm not going to see it because of all the negative press. Doesn't matter what they're talking about in those reviews, by the way. It doesn't matter if they're bringing up good points either. The fact is that they're just simply saying, oh yeah, people are just idiots, and they're going to look and see what the low score is or why it's a low score, and they're just going to say, oh, it's not a good movie because of the score. It's again ridiculous, and I can't believe that they're honest. I can believe it, right? But it's crazy to think that we are living in a world now where they still try to run with this narrative when we know, hey, it does not take a whole lot to be able to Google search. It does not take a whole lot to DuckDuckGo. It does not take a whole lot to actually look at the reviews themselves and say, wait a minute, you're talking about all of these maybe 1-star or half-star reviews without any details, without any information whatsoever. But then you also don't talk about, and you ignore, the plethora of 5-star reviews or 10-star reviews, depending on the site that you're on, that also have a similar thing. You don't call that review bombing, right? You don't call that or a conspiracy to try to, lift up a movie, if that ever does happen, and it obviously does happen. But again, it's just inconsistency on their part. But as you can see, their information here, it says it's made $68 million internationally. Right, just as a comparison, it made about 95 million or so, 95.5 domestically. So for a movie like this to open up to every single major international market, with one exception being Japan, and to open up to 68.3, even if the movie somehow sees a strong hold next weekend, which I don't think it's going to happen, especially especially internationally. Yeah, that is something that they're not going to be able to recover from, right? We're going to see in a comparison between the last live-action film that got a full theatrical release, which would be Disney's Aladdin from 2019, why this movie's chances of not just doing well, but even making money and making profits are almost slim to none at this point in time, because the international being that low and the domestic not really being all that impressive, especially even compared back to 2019's Aladdin. Danger, 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 Will Robinson, as is often said. Also, you can see our buddy Tony. That was Nance over at Deadline. Tony's also saying something a little similar here. Little Mermaid now swimming to $117 million opening. That's going to include the Monday numbers. Remember that they were saying this could be up to 125, 150 million. Oh boy, have those numbers changed? Have they been updating these things down for a while? As it says right here, it pulled in $30 million, which is the same amount of money as Disney's Aladdin. Oh, wait a minute. $30 million in 2019. Guess what? It's not the same number. So you can try to argue saying, oh, it made the same money as Aladdin. No, Aladdin actually made a little more because the value of the dollar is a lot higher when you look at it from 2019's numbers versus what it is today. But good try, Tony. I appreciate your effort nonetheless. That's why inflation's so important, people. Pulled in on its Saturday over Memorial Day weekend with a revised outlook for the Rob Marshall directed musical at $95.5 million and $117.5 over 4 days, according to this AM number. And so it's going to, of course, mention here saying Aladdin wound in bringing up another $30 million on its Sunday and $25.3 million Memorial Day weekend for $116.8. And again, these are unadjusted numbers. IMAX screens were split up between Little Mermaid, which did $7 million, and Fast 10, which made $1.4 million for an estimated $1.2 million running total for Fast 10's total domestic run. Now, what's interesting by that is just the fact that Fast 10 has not really done a whole lot anywhere else here in the States at the very least. It's done a lot overseas, but nothing here. But Little Mermaid, let's just say, as it is, movie's not doing well. And to say, oh, look at it, it's right up there with the last live action film, so it's right on pace. No, this is a movie that should have been doing better, right? If they wanted to have a success, especially because it costs a lot more to make The Little Mermaid, for this film to be neck and neck, and actually in reality, when you look at the actual data itself behind 2019's film, that is not a good look whatsoever. So go ahead and look at the actual numbers on thenumbers.com. And as you can see, $95.5 million domestic means about a $22,000 per theater ratio. So a decent per theater ratio there, coming at over 4,300 screens. But that $95.5 million, it's underneath the $100+ million that was being talked about prior. And the 4-day total, right, it's going to be coming in underneath the projections that they had for that too. So basically, Little Mermaid, it's doing okay domestically, right? These are not the worst films numbers we've ever seen. You know, there was talk about it being the 5th highest grossing Memorial Day weekend of all time. Now, of course, all of those are compared to unadjusted numbers, which, as you all know, I don't think is very fair, but it would still be one where, hey, it's in the discussion, it's being talked about. People are actually going to see this movie. But those international numbers basically take away any possible positivity you can say as far as the film's financial prospects are concerned. Something very similar can actually be said about Fast 10, because Fast 10 is seeing that reverse problem. Whereas it's doing okay internationally, 66% drop. So this is from a weekend where the numbers were really not that good, right? It was around a $68 million opening weekend, which is nothing to write home about. Fast 10 dropped 66% after even adding 42 screens. Look at that per theater ratio, right? This movie actually almost lost to the 4th weekend numbers of Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3. So what does that say? It says Fast 10 not doing well domestically, Guardians still doing really well. And I've been saying this for a long time now. I've been saying this for 4 weeks. Guardians is doing a lot better than what many of us had expected, and what many people maybe even still are saying about the movie. Hey, the movie is a success, the movie is making money, and it's continuing to show strong. The fact that it's had a 38% hold in its 4th week shows on Memorial Day weekend, people are looking at the theater saying, what do I want to go see? Okay, you have a lot of families going to see Little Mermaid because that's the new movie. Everyone else is saying, I'm going to see Guardians. I'm going to go see this movie instead. And hey, sure enough, it's doing much better than anticipated, and it's still doing very well for the film in its franchise. And even though it is definitely not going to be anything to raise anyone's hopes about the future of the MCU or even the MCU's box office, it's still, hey, by it in and of itself, in isolation, it's actually doing very well. So kudos to the team behind Guardians 3 for being able to make at least a successful movie. I think there's some problems with it. Again, I don't love the movie, but the numbers are what they are. Super Mario Bros. Movie is also doing very well here, 35% hold, though we are starting to see the film, even though the holds are still strong, the total numbers, both domestically and internationally, are slowing. This makes sense. This movie has been out for 8 weeks. It's on PVOD now. It's going to be available on Blu-ray and DVD, etc., not too long from now either. And so it's pretty much made exactly what it's going to make at this point. But it also means that we're looking at a $1.3 billion ceiling when everything is said and done. So, hey, Super Mario Bros. Movie, it's made a decent amount of money, but it looks like its run is nearing its end as far as, big numbers and big additions every single week. Coming in the number 5 spot is the new film from Sony, the new comedy, The Machine, which I really don't have that much interest in, but I know some people do. 2,400 screens, $4.9 million. Based on its budget, this is actually a very, very weak play. In fact, the next several movies, with the one exception of A24, because they're doing, again, one of these weird, weird slow releases and slow rolls for their independent movies. But for the next 3, including The Machine, it's not looking good. So $4.9 million for The Machine. About My Father from Lionsgate, $2.2 million. And then Briarcliff Entertainment's Kandahar, $2.4 million, based off of the budget estimates that we have for the first 2. We don't have numbers yet for Kandahar, but we can make some guesses. Let's just say right now those are all leaning towards being flops, and no one is really showing a lot of interest in those movies. Coming in the number 8 spot, as I mentioned, is You Hurt My Feelings. from A24, which I know very little about. Again, A24 always has these very odd releases, and hey, at least they're releasing it close to 1,000 screens, where normally they release it in like 30 screens, and then they slowly add another 30 every single week, and it just drives me crazy because it's impossible to track when they do that. Evil Dead Rise is, as you can see, starting to near the end of its run, being dropped from 1,200 screens to make way for other films from Warner Brothers, but hey, it's the only profitable movie that they've really had in several months, if not years. So kudos to them for continuing to add money to their profits in that specific movie. Overall, I think they're still definitely running in the red on their overall tally. Book Club: The Next Chapter at $920,000. Again, 3 weeks in, and it's already being dropped from 2,000 screens. That film is a guaranteed flop at this point. And then our 11th spot, we got John Wick Chapter 4, which is still hanging around, but is definitely on the way out. Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret, also on the way out. Still a box office flop for Lionsgate. And Nefarious is still hanging around as well, though it's only at 166 screens. Again, a decent per theater ratio there, but ultimately I can't say much more about it until I get an actual budget for the movie to be able to do some analysis on. Going into the individual releases, let's go ahead and not talk about Aladdin, right? We'll get to Aladdin's numbers in just a second, but first off, let's talk about The Little Mermaid, right? Now, Aladdin's going to be the best comparison for The Little Mermaid, though, because it actually had the same release. Both of these movies came out over the Memorial Day weekend. And so looking at these numbers in comparison to one another, right, we had a $250 million budget for Little Mermaid versus $207 million for Aladdin. Now, these are adjusted numbers for inflation. As you all know, the numbers inflation calculator is not the most accurate in the world, meaning that it oftentimes goes underneath what the likely number is. But I think it's still a good comparison, and it gets across the point of why The Little Mermaid is really doing very, very poorly, especially internationally. But go ahead and look at those domestic opening weekends, right? Little Mermaid opened to $95.5 million. Aladdin opened to $104.3 when you adjust those numbers. Remember how they were talking about how, it made the same amount of money on that first Saturday? Nay, nay, nay. When you adjust those numbers, it made an extra $4 million for Aladdin. Right? Not to mention, its Sunday numbers were a lot higher than what the projected Sunday numbers are for The Little Mermaid. What goes even further, though, is remember, they're now projecting over at Deadline that they think that The Little Mermaid, for the 4-day Memorial Day weekend total, is going to be around $117.5 million. We'll go ahead and look at this comparison. By its first Monday, $133 million was made by Aladdin. So what this tells us is that, okay, Little Mermaid, it's doing much better domestically than internationally. That's something that's very, very clear with that 95.5 versus the 68.3 million it's made so far internationally. But it's also telling us that this film is tracking behind Aladdin. And so that can start to give us some early indications. Okay, what was the end domestic box office for Aladdin? Around $405 million. Okay, if it's tracking behind it right now, and this came out around the same time of year, right, coming out over the Memorial Day weekend, okay, then we can expect that this movie, having very similar reactions, it seems, from audiences, right, a lot of these live action films have had very similar reactions from audiences. If we see very similar drops, okay, then we can probably expect this film to come in, $350 million domestically when everything is said and done. Okay, you then take that and say, okay, but what about internationally? With a $68.3 million start, and only Japan is left, and yes, Japan did provide $100 million or so to Aladdin back in 2019. Right now, the Asian markets are not performing very well, right? The movie's not performing well, Little Mermaid, in those Asian markets, and so we can suspect that it might be a similar story in Japan. We'll have to wait and see. But also remember that Japan has been very weird recently, right? Because everyone was expecting that the Super Mario Brothers movie was going to make a bank, was going to make huge money there, and it ended up not really doing a whole lot, right? It did decent money, but in comparison to homegrown Japan films and even some of the most impressive and the biggest grossing, the highest grossing Western releases in those countries, it's not really even in the top discussion, right? So could we see this film end up performing better? Maybe. Again, it's a weird market at this point, but we could also see it performing worse as well. So you're talking in a situation here with $68.3 million internationally where, hey, maybe let's be generous and say, $250 million internationally? So you take the $250 million or so, add that to the $300 million. Okay, we're talking about maybe a $550 to $650 million worldwide total for Little Mermaid with everything said and done. right? And again, this is just based off of opening weekend. If something happens by next weekend and we see, insane holds, I don't think we're going to, based on what we're seeing right now, but you never know. If we do see those insane numbers, though, those projections might end. But I think right now, 550 to 650 is a likely scenario, and that is a big problem. And we'll get into that more going into the charting and talking about the budget for this movie and what this film needs to make to break even. But let's just say, right now with those numbers, it is not looking good at all. It's also not looking great for Fast 10. $107.9 million domestically versus almost $400 million internationally. This film is doing next to nothing domestically at this point in time, dropping 66% domestically, and it's doing okay in these international markets. But keep in mind, from these international markets, where is the vast majority of this money coming from? $110 million coming from China. So a fourth of the entire international numbers and a fifth of the entire worldwide numbers is coming from China alone. That's not a good place to be. And that means, one, I can project at this point this film is not going to make $1 billion, but also there's a good chance that this film could end up losing money. And I believe this would be the first time a Fast and Furious movie will ever have lost money. A big part of that, of course, is the massive budget that this movie has. But we'll have to wait and see what the final number is to know exactly what kind of loss we're looking at. But let's just say it has a chance of losing money a lot higher than it does a chance of making money at this point. Guardians of the Galaxy Volume 3 at $731 million. This film is going to easily pass Thor 4 by next weekend. Thor 4 wrapped out around $750 million. So this film is guaranteed to get to at least $800 million. The question is going to be how much past $800 million. And my projections for a while now have been between $800 and $900 million. I think it has a good chance, a decent chance, to be able to maybe even catch up or pass up Black Panther Wakanda Forever. I sure hope it does. It's a much better movie than that one. But we're still going to have to wait and see on that. But hey, it's doing very well over the Memorial Day frame domestically. Shows, I think, $350 million domestically is actually very possible for Guardians. Internationally, maybe getting to $550 million when everything's said and done. So either way, looking at a very, very strong numbers for this movie. Super Mario, this movie is also still making, again, still has made so far a ton of money. But as you can see, not much difference from last weekend, right? 1.2 billion is still the number. So I think by the end of it, 1.3 billion is going to happen. But as you can see, Japan did not show up in the degree that many people thought. Right now, it's going to probably struggle to get to $100 million there. But hey, still strong enough in every other part of the world. This film is easily a financial success. Then we have The Machine. That poster alone also makes me not interested to go see it. I just, again, doesn't seem like my kind of thing. $4.9 million, really not a strong start. Same about My Father as well, with $4.2 million. Robert De Niro in yet another paycheck movie. Kandahar with Gerard Butler, $2.4 million. No budget reported yet on this movie as of the recording of this video. You Hurt My Feelings from A24. Also don't know much about this other than Julie Louis-Dreyfus being in it, $1.3 million. Again, with these smaller films, it's always a little bit harder to track them. Evil Dead Rise, $142 million, continuing to add to its overall box office profits. Book Club Next Chapter, still a box office flop. John Wick Chapter 4, continuing to add to its profits, though on the way out. Are You There, God, It's Me, Margaret, is also a box office flop. And then there is also Nefarious. Great film, just was not really given a fair chance and a fair shake from Hollywood. Going into the box office charting, because I love charting here over at OMB Reviews. Let's first talk about Fast 10, all right? So based on these numbers, as you all know, I make my projections in a couple of ways. One, I project what the actual box office will be by the end of its run, and most films fall into these categories, right? Most films fall into the range that I give here. So Fast 10, based on the fact it's made $507 million worldwide at this point, after the first 2 weeks, I'm suspecting the film will get somewhere between $724 million and $1 billion. Now, the max projection of $1 billion, that means that the film has incredible holds, right? You're seeing Super Mario Brothers types holds. You would even say seeing Guardians of the Galaxy type holds. But the difference, of course, is that Guardians was doing okay in certain markets, whereas this movie, Fast 10, is doing okay internationally and then doing terribly domestically. But again, if we were seeing those kinds of holds, 66% drop week 1 to week 2, we're not seeing that kind of hold. So what does that mean? We're going to see this film probably somewhere between 724 and 869. And I would say, based on what we're seeing, there's a good chance we could even see it come in as a chart breaker, only in the negative direction, meaning coming in underneath 724. We'll have to wait and see, but not looking good at this point in time. What does that mean for profits? It means the film could either lose $75 million or could make as much as 98. For the average, that would be 11.7 million. And so ultimately what I think is going to happen is I think this movie is going to end up being in the negative. I think it's going to end up being in the red. At this point in time, it's still at 285 million in the red with a $340 million budget. That means the movie has to make somewhere between, at minimum, $850 million. And some people might have it as a 3-time multiplier, meaning you would have to see this film get closer to $1 billion if it had any chance to break even. In either case, not a good look. Not a good scenario for it. And let's just say I think that a box office loss is very clearly in its future. But again, those international numbers could end up making a difference. What's not going to help it internationally, or at least internationally, is not going to have the same kind of impact on Little Mermaid, because right now it's not doing much of anything anywhere. Again, it's doing decently in the domestic market, and everywhere else it's just doing abysmal. At $163.8 million, that means right now the film is at $276 million in the red. At a $250 million budget, again, based on my standards, the film has to make around $625 million. If you were to take this at a 3 times multiplier, then it makes to make probably somewhere between $625 and $750 million to break even. In either case, I think that it's a problem. Now, going back to what I said just a few minutes ago, right, talking about the projections, right? Somewhere I think this film could fall at this point, based on what we're seeing, between 550 and 650. As you can see from that, the average would then put this movie in flop territory, would be a financial loss. I would not be surprised if when all the numbers come in, it's a $50 to $100 million loss. All right, that's the kind of numbers that we're seeing from this movie right now. I don't think Japan's going to come in and save the day for it. We still have to wait for those numbers to actually come out. And so obviously I could be wrong on that, but it's just not seeming like that's going to be the case based on how Japan has performed as of late and as of recently, and especially how it's been performing on films that have had delayed releases in that country. And so, yeah, let's just say Little Mermaid is not in a very strong position and has a very good chance of ending up not just not breaking even or barely breaking even, but possibly losing money. And I believe this would be the first Disney live-action film to get a full theatrical release. We're not talking here about Mulan. That was impacted by COVID. Obviously, that was a massive financial loss for Disney at that point. But this could be the first time that a full-fledged, full-featured, full distribution movie from Disney, the live-action Disney remakes, ends up being an actual box office flop. And hey, couldn't happen to a nicer company. Talking about some of the other films, as I mentioned with Kandahar, we don't have a budget yet, but About My Father and the Machine costing around $20 to $30 million. As you can see with that single-digit numbers opening weekend here, that's the reason why I suspect these films still too early. I'll say officially by next weekend. I just doubt the two films are gonna see any type of major change between those two between this weekend and next weekend. So those films ultimately are going to be box office flops and failures. Hypnotic is continuing to also be a box office flop. Again, it's actually has not been updated because the numbers have not been really giving updates on that movie. The last time I checked, again, I don't even think it's actually on this list as I have it right now. By the way, also the numbers is apparently seeing some slowing right now. But let's see if I can go ahead and pull this up, because I know some people, there were at least a couple people who had interest in this movie. I did not, and based on the numbers that I'm seeing and some of the reviews on it, I probably will wait for this film to get a physical media release. And as you can see, the numbers is going slow as molasses right now. So let's see, $5 million. So really not that much of a difference here. You can see me. This is how I update my numbers in real time, by the way. So boom, there you can see still $94 million in the red. Not much of a difference there at all. Book Club also still a financial loss. Guardians now adding to its profits, has a good chance of getting to around $100 million in net gain profits. So yeah, not great comparison, not great ratio of how much you spent to how much you got back in profits. But hey, at least this film's making money. I don't think you could say the same thing for The Little Mermaid. Love Again, still a flop. Big George Foreman, also a flop. Sisu, Are You There, God? It's Me, Margaret. Guys Ritchie's The Covenant, etc. are all also still flops at this point. Evil Dead Rise continuing to add to its money, but it's on the way out. And then also talking here about Nefarious, it's doing okay. And then the box office Super Mario Brothers movie, $600+ million in profits. It's insane how much profit this film has made. And hey, kudos to them for being able to do so. But those are the numbers as they stand. What are y'all's thoughts, especially when it comes to Little Mermaid and Fast 10? Those are the two big stories, right? Little Mermaid is a complete flop internationally, whereas Fast 10 is a complete flop domestically. And I think in both cases, right, even look at this, 2 weeks in, $285 million loss for Fast 10. Much of that is because of its massive budget. 1 weekend, $276 million in the red for Little Mermaid. I think there's a good chance we're going to see both of these films end up flopping, especially since we do have a series of movies starting next week. I believe we are finally getting the Spider-Verse movie, which I don't have a lot of interest in, but I know that there are people who do, and I think it's going to do pretty well. I think it's going to be the number one film in the box office next weekend. So where is this film going to end up falling, and is it going to take away audience from Little Mermaid? We will have to wait and see. But let me know your thoughts about this and anything else I mentioned in the comment section down below. If you like this video, smash that like button, that fire button, and smash the rumble button as well. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. A blessed Pentecost Sunday. It is the Holy Feast of Pentecost. So may the Holy Spirit fill you, and may the Holy Spirit guide you at all times. You are all amazing and beautiful people. Have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless. And now for a huge special shout out to all of my patrons at the Keeper of the Bifrost level and above, starting off with my patrons over on Patreon: Father Luca Illich, Hymir Irie Hymason, Garrett Searles, Joe Horn, Jonathan Carney, Orange Chat Reviews, who you can check out over at his YouTube channel, Orange Chat Reviews, Laura, the Modern Major General Story, Rosetta Allen, who you can check out at her YouTube channel of Eagle Rider, and Miss Modern Muses, who you can check out at her YouTube channel by the same name as well. Also to my Subscribe Star peeps, Matt317, check him out over on Twitch, Fast Reaction, The R, Mr. Roy, J-Rod, The Beer Guru, and ZK-Man, you can check out over at xtheboundaries.co. And lastly, to my local supporters, Miss Minnesota Hockey Fan, How About a Hockey Player, J.H. Schwalbach, and Robert Barnes, the amazing lawyer. Thank y'all very much for supporting me at that Keep It the Bifrost level and above. And if you want your name shout out at the end of every video and live stream, make sure to check out the top link in the video description in order to get access to that. Also, there's a level where you get access to an exclusive podcast that I do with my friend John the Flip Pig Flickinger, and also to a giveaways channel on my Discord where you get access to the giveaways of various 4K titles, including right now I've got a 4K Steelbook for Training Day. I got the 7th Seal from Criterion, Plane Trains Automobiles, Kubo and the Two Strings, They Live, Train to Busan, tons of others every single week, every single week. I'm going to stick by that. We're doing this live. I just recently gave away the 3 Steelbook collection for John Wick franchise, the amazing Stash Book Collection version. So if you want to have access to various things like that, hey, check out that top link in the video description below. You're all amazing and beautiful people. Hope you have a wonderful rest of your day. And as always, God bless.